A few headlines just to set the scene. Biden says ICC war crimes arrest warrant outrageous. You don't need to read further to be confident he's referring to the ones issued for Benjamin Netanyahu and his sacked Defense Minister Yoav Galant. Corrupt, in quotes, war crime charges are anti-Semitic hate, says Netanyahu. What is he worried about? Israeli leader faces arrest if he flies into Britain on the front of the Times. Shouldn't we let the legal process take its course before we jump to extremely strong and pungent conclusions? Shouldn't we just wait and see what happens? When did this become a naive position to adopt? Unless you are living in the upside down, you wait for due process to take its course. You have faith in the rules-based order. You have to, because it's all that guards us against chaos. It's all that guards us against tyranny. Vladimir Putin has an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court in place, which essentially confines him to the boundaries of Russia, with a couple of exceptions. He'd be welcome, I'm sure, in North Korea, if he hasn't been already. But it's what the rules-based international order does. And then you investigate, you interrogate the allegation, and you find out whether or not it's true. 140 countries are signatories to the International Criminal Court. And although the predictability with which Benjamin Netanyahu cites anti-Semitism against this allegation that him and his former defense minister have effectively starved people in Gaza by preventing aid from making its way in, something that has been talked about now for years, you begin to wonder quite how you've ended up in this situation, or how we've ended up in this situation. Not just the warrants being issued, but also the entirely predictable response from people who have allowed Benjamin Netanyahu to achieve impunity. This is what those of us who worry that he is worse for Israel than for almost any other element of this whole sorry saga. That's what those of us have tried to explain, that unswerving support for him is probably not in the best interest of Israel, have been worried about from the very start. Because you afford impunity to somebody who is so obviously unfit, whether or not the corruption charges against him, which he has sought to avoid. I don't suppose he can accuse Israeli courts of being anti-Semitic, can he? But they're quite desperate to put him in the dock as well. An important point that is missed by almost every frothing right-wing commentator pretending or professing to be offended by this move today. I'll say that again. Israeli courts are desperate to get Benjamin Netanyahu into a dock as well. So I don't imagine he'll be able to accuse them of anti-Semitism, but frankly, I wouldn't put it past him. However, he's comfortable firing off a personal attack on the prosecutor. Why wouldn't you want the legal process to be, why wouldn't you want justice to be seen to be done? This is the best opportunity for defenders of Netanyahu to prove that he's done nothing wrong. And of course, if your bias is so complete that you can't contemplate even the vaguest possibility that he's done something wrong, then you have to accuse the institutions of being unfit for purpose and being biased. And yet it's been undertaken by people who frankly should know better. Nobody has demonstrated ignorance, though, so far on the scale of the shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, who posted on social media. But it's a very helpful illustration of how desperate these defences already are. He writes, "The ICC has no credibility as it turns a blind eye to the crimes of tyrants like Khomeini and Putin." There are two problems with that sentence. Can you spot what they are? Or shall I tell you? Okay, Khomeini's dead, and there is a warrant out for Putin. But the shadow Secretary of State for Justice is so immersed in culture wars and ignorance and idiocy and performative provocation that he either doesn't understand that or couldn't be bothered to find out, or elected to pretend that he didn't know it because he thought he'd get more clicks and giggles by telling that lie. But in the context of the world, if there is not a rule book by which we all abide, or by which all democracies are required to abide, if that rule book doesn't exist, or if that rule book gets torn up, what are we left with? Why? Because due process is all that we have got. It's all that we have got. It's why extremist politicians hate it. It's all that we have got. It's all that guards us against tyranny, either in our own country or elsewhere. So when Owen Paterson was found to have broken the rules in the House of Commons, what did Boris Johnson, various Daily Telegraph journalists and Jacob Rees-Mogg try to do? They tried to rip up the rule book. They tried to condemn the actual parliamentary standards rather than condemning the parliamentarian who had been found by a jury of his peers to have broken them. Because if you give impunity to anybody, they will use it. And that's why the International Criminal Court finds itself in the unhappy position of having to issue a warrant for the Prime Minister of Israel. And I don't understand why anybody wouldn't welcome the opportunity he has been given to prove that he's not guilty of any of the things many people believe him to be, up to and including war crimes and genocide.